just can't win. No.
All right, that was Dan Barker,
That's right.
Original Sin. And Dan's a former minister who is now an atheist and one of the, I don't know if he's a founder, but he's definitely one of the members of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Great group, and I always like listening to his stuff. Welcome to this edition of the Atheist Experience. I'm your host, Matt Dillahunty, and joining me this week is Don Baker.
Hello.
How you doing?
Here. I'm doing all right.
And Don's going to, as usual, provide us with a little insight and information shortly, but we got a few announcements to get out of the way, and also I'm going to add one little quick bit after the announcements. We're live January 29th, 2006. This is a live call-in program. We'll be taking your calls later, your chance to ask us questions and get answers from atheists. And we'll put the number up shortly. But we have announcements to get out of the way. We're sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. We have weekly meetings at Romeo's on Barton Springs at 11:30 every Sunday, except for the third Sunday of the month when we host a lecture series. And the next lecture in February, you've got the information on that.
Yeah, it'll be Dr. Alan Klein from he's a UT professor in computer science, but he recently gave a lecture at UT talking about the denigration of science right now in our culture, and how people are not considering it important and such. So his topic is called the disregard of science and the responsibility of citizens, and so he'll be talking about science and how we can help promote it, and rational thinking, of course.
Great. That's February 19th will be the lecture. Those are held at the Austin History Center, located at the corner of 9th and Guadalupe.
That's right.
And
12:30, and it's free and open to the public.
And in addition to this program, the ACA also sponsors an internet audio program called The Nonprofits. That's PROPHETS. It's normally broadcast over freethoughtradio.com, but Free Thought Radio is doing some improvements to their service. And yesterday's show had to be canceled, unfortunately, due to technical difficulties. My internet provider went down for most of the weekend, or part of the weekend. So the next live show of that, I think, is the 11th, but I'm not positive.
2 weeks from yesterday.
2 weeks from yesterday.
Right.
You can visit nonprofitsradio.com, or which you can get to from the ACA website as well, for more information on the show. In addition to the programs that we sponsor, the ACA also has a number of social activities throughout the week. On Monday, we have Godless Gamers at Russell Glasser's home. Tuesday is Unholy Rollers at Playline Skating Rink, which is on McCann near 183 in Burnett. And Thursdays is Atheist Happy Hour at Antonio's Tex-Mex on the southbound feeder road of I-35, just south of 183. Those, as with all the events and the lectures, are open to any atheist or atheist-friendly people who'd like to join us, have a chance to meet other ACA members who you won't probably be seeing on the air, although we're hoping to change some of that, as well as cast and crew. And after the show, the cast and crew have been getting together for dinner. We'll be going to Mongolian Barbecue again tonight, 117 San Jacinto. That's downtown near 2nd Street, and show goes off the air at 6, so we normally get there somewhere between 6:30, 6:45. This will be the last week at Mongolian, and next week we'll be moving on to Threadgills on Barton Springs, just east of Lamar.
The south location, but
so we'll have more information on that, and more information on all of these events is available at the ACA website, atheist-community.org. And I think that does it for most of the announcements. If you're wanting to join us at an event to preach or proselytize, don't bother doing it. Just hang on. We'll put the number up, and you can call us in a few minutes and tell us why you're right and we're wrong, or ask us questions. Last week, we had 2 calls near the end of the show. The next to the last call was asking about how atheists can be moral without God, without a belief in God, without God as the foundation of morality. What keeps us from doing bad things? And I ended up cutting that short to get to the final caller of the show, which was a mistake on my part. I thought it was going to relate to that and I'd be able to do a little tie-in, and it didn't. I'm not going to answer that directly right now because I think we're probably going to get into that subject quite a bit throughout the show, and it's also something we address quite often.
Simple answers, actions have consequences.
Right. But the final caller asked, and I don't remember the exact wording, but called and asked, how can you possibly not believe in God and believe in something else like gravity that you can't accept? And to answer that, I just...
That you can't see.
No, that you can't see. Sorry, right. Thank you. And to answer that, I just took my pen and dropped it, because to me that's enough of an explanation. There's something obvious there. We didn't touch on it too much. I want to go over it briefly real quick just so she can get an answer to her question. Gravity is just a name that we apply to an observable effect, something which is accepted axiomatically by everybody. I mean, everybody experiences gravity. We're all being held to the earth. We've dropped things. It's an explanation of effect, and on that, it's enough on its own. But scientists have gone on and investigated this and tried to quantify and define it further and come up with a better description of what gravity is, and that all is encompassed in gravitational theory. And you have, for instance, gravity, the acceleration due to gravity near the Earth is 9.8 meters per second squared, and the expansion of gravity, the gravitational theory, to beyond just the confines of Earth and using it universally, we've discovered that it's the force of gravity acting on objects is proportional to the mass of both objects and the distance.
Well, it lets us predict the orbits of the planets to a high degree of accuracy. It lets us send a man to the moon and so on. You strap enough rocket fuel. The whole point is to do all those calculations so that you not only escape the Earth's gravity, but so that you can use your cell phone. We have satellites in orbit, and what's really true is that satellites are constantly falling. That's right.
They're really just falling around the Earth. They're just doing it within an orbit.
Right? It's mechanics, right?
And if you're, if that's too much, every time you're walking, you're falling. And I mention that because I'm a big Laurie Anderson fan, and she has this whole thing of, we're falling, we're constantly falling, because really every time you take a step, you're falling forward and catching yourself and stopping yourself from falling, and that's how we walk. God, on the other hand, is completely different. It's not just a matter of being invisible. I mean, air is invisible to the naked eye, yet you can see the effects of it. You can see it blowing smoke and everything else. God is a non-answer. There's not even an observable effect or reason to postulate that a God exists. It's just a stopgap to fill in unknown answers we don't have yet. And the thing is that God's not, they try to use, the people who advocate a God hypothesis, try and use it as an answer when it's really a non-answer. It's in many ways just a tautology, but it doesn't explain anything. All it does is say this is the way God wanted it, and it stops anybody from investigating further if they accept that answer. So if you wanted to put God on the same kind of playing field with gravity, you'd first need to define some kind of observation or reason or effect or anything that you wanted to explain. Then you would have to define God, and God's pretty much non-defined. Everybody has a different idea about God and what God is. And you'd have to define it in such a way that it's actually an answer to the thing that you're wanting to explain. And then you would have to actually demonstrate that the answer, God, is correct, that it's a real explanation for what you're trying to explain. And that is how an atheist can have no problem believing in the invisible gravity, but not your invisible friend.
Yeah, it all boils down to evidence, right?
Yeah.
Right. We have evidence for gravity, we understand it pretty well, and repeatability, all that good stuff.
So that's something I'm going to try and do, because we get a lot of calls, and we, some of the calls are better than others and ask tougher questions. Sometimes we run out of time. Sometimes we don't necessarily have the best answer. So what I'd like to start doing, since I'm on every week, is if there's something that didn't quite get addressed well the week before, I'll try and work up something to hit that.
It's tough sometimes to answer some of these questions off the top of your head. You get more experienced over time, but sometimes you get some curveballs.
So you've actually got a really interesting discussion today.
Well, I think so. I actually had a conversation with a coworker about religious topic, and we got on the topic of sin, and she was sort of justifying a lot of Christian action in terms of sin, and I was just amazed at it, So today I wanted to talk about sin and what are some of the problems with it, the whole concept, and how it's kind of meaningless and confusing and doesn't really help matters, and how it's kind of a poor replacement for the concept of responsibility, which I think is really what we should be using instead. And just throw that out, and there's a lot of interesting tangents here. Matt is very knowledgeable about the Bible, so I'm hoping he'll chime in, and we'll talk about some of these issues. So to start out with sin, you have to start out with the whole idea of original sin, or this whole idea of Adam and Eve, and the story of how God set up this wonderful garden, and Adam and Eve were there, and they were told, or actually Adam was there, he was told not to eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, and then Eve came along, and then she fed Adam the fruit, and that's kind of the gist of it, I guess. And so then they became aware of knowledge, I guess, and were kicked out of the garden because of that. Now you can probably tell that story a lot better than I can.
Well, I'd be surprised if there's not a lot of people who don't know the story.
Familiar with it.
The thing that I always found interesting about it is that the Gnostics, at least some Gnostic traditions, brought up a very good point, and that is that if you look at the story step by step as to what actually happened, you come away with not the image of a loving creator God. You come away with this concept of an omniscient God who conspired to completely set up the fall. I mean, putting Adam and Eve in a garden and posting a tree there and saying, don't eat that, is kind of like putting a toddler in a crib with a loaded gun. And then when they shoot, when they shoot their leg off, now in addition to missing a leg, you're going to beat them, weekly. Once a week, I'm just going to beat you because you shot that gun. That's kind of the way that original sin and punishment for that comes. But the thing that the Gnostics pointed out, and others have as well, is that if you look at the story, you've got God telling them, don't eat that fruit on the day you eat it, you will surely die. And then you have the serpent, who later is recast as Satan, but there's a lot of other stories in Babylonian myths and things that are similar, so it's not quite so clear. But he comes along and says, that's not true. You're not going to die when you eat that. You're going to learn. You're going to have knowledge. You're going to have the knowledge of the gods, and he doesn't want you to have that. And what happens is they eat the fruit, they get the knowledge, and they don't die. So you have the serpent there who's actually telling them the truth. Right. And God's the one that lied to them.
So they have to go back and backfill it, rationalize it, and say, oh, well, that was really,
a spiritual death.
Spiritual death.
Yeah. They were immoral before then.
Yeah, they meant something else.
They were immortal before then because our lives have gradually been getting shorter. You had like these 700, 800, 900-year-old men, and now we live about 70 years because that's the new God's dictum. It has nothing to do with modern medicine.
Okay, well, we can do a whole thing on that.
Anyway.
Our life expectancies have actually increased in the last 100 years or so quite a bit. Okay, so we have this this whole idea that Adam ate this fruit and Eve is the culprit, and all this evil stuff happened, and we were kicked out, and we were going to have to suffer because of sin, and so basically this casts human as innately depraved and innately evil. Effectively, and that just by being born, you are guilty of original sin for just being human. And one of the implications of that is infants deserve to be tortured, right? Infants are guilty of original sin, and anybody who's so guilty, deserves the tortures of hell. And why not have some more tortures here on the earth? So for being born, you have this moral implication. And this gets into this whole idea of limbo and purgatory and all that, which is another tangent we can pursue, but I think we'll skip on it. You see this whole idea of original sin showing up in Pope John Paul after the 9/11 attack talked about how the 9/11 attack was blamed on humanity, right? He blamed humanity for the evil of this attack. He didn't blame blind faith. He didn't blame the worship of a mass-murdering God. He didn't blame the religious institutions that had indoctrinate in belief of glorious afterlife. He didn't blame murder for the cause of moral purity. He didn't blame martyrdom. He didn't blame Islam. He blamed humanity. He blamed if you're anti-abortion, he blamed the unborn babies. And that's who he blames. So
you're talking about the Pope?
I'm talking about the Pope, John Paul.
Yeah, he wasn't the only one who did that.
Yeah. Well, I'm just sort of illustrating a theme here, right?
Yeah.
This is.
Well, I have to say it because I love picking on these guys.
Okay.
Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell did the same thing.
Okay.
Falwell was on Robertson's show and made the outrageous statement that the 9/11 attacks were the result of abortionists, atheists, ACLU, the secular, anything that he doesn't agree with is what caused 9/11.
Right.
And Pat Robertson, being mostly senile in my opinion by this time, just sits there and nods his head, yeah, absolutely, praise the Lord. And of course, they both ended up having to submit a kind of half-baked apology.
Right.
I think kind of Pat Robertson's the king of half-baked apologies we've been seeing lately.
Well, and one of their shticks is that they're blaming people who they think are taking us away from God, right?
Right.
And it's a little bit different concept than sin. It's sort of the secularists, us evil people.
Well, by their thing, we are all the devil's tools. We are sinners, and we are deceived in our sin, and we're trying to convince everybody else to sin as well. We are the tempters.
Are we? Okay.
Fear us.
Okay. Well, if we've got all sorts of things we can follow here. I mean, I can understand this idea of owing some sort of debt to my ancestors, right? I mean, without them, I wouldn't be here, right? So I have some sort of sympathy for ancestor religions where you might worship the ancestors or the spirits or whatever, the ones that came before you. But this is a different thing. This is a whole idea of some ancestor of mine supposedly earned this karmic debt that I'm now responsible for, and I just don't buy this. This whole notion of being guilty for somebody else's sin is a mind game.
And that's actually, there's contradictory information in the Bible about that. There are a couple verses that say the sins of the father will be passed on to the son under the 4th generation, and another verse that says under the 10th generation. And then there are other verses which say the sins of the father won't be passed to the sons. So, I mean, you've got this confusing doctrine which allows them to say, well, innocent babies, they're really innocent, which is how the Catholics came up with limbo.
Right.
And now they've done away with it.
Right.
They're responsible for more harm to infant souls than anybody ever.
That's right, taking away that limbo.
Hey, here's some limbo for you. Yeah.
So I think this is just a mind game to convince people that they owe some sort of debt to this God or Christianity or whatever, so that they can be manipulated. In reality, I think God created this situation in the first place, right? I mean, the tree, like you say, the tree, he put the tree there. He said, don't go over there. Let's see, if sin is part of human nature, then the Creator is responsible, So you sort of can't have it both ways. So
there's a little bit of a problem of evil aspect in there, which is something, without actually doing the whole problem of evil argument, if you have the idea of an omniscient and omnipotent creator, so I can create, if I'm this creator, I can create any universe I want with any rules that I want, and I know ahead of time what all the results are going to be.
Right.
That means that this particular God with those qualities specifically created this universe knowing in advance everything that would ever happen. And because he had options, that means he specifically created a world where Adam and Eve sinned and did the fall for man. And also that means he has handpicked who's going to be saved at the end and who's not. Because he had other options available to him and didn't choose them. And that's where Calvin and the others get this predetermination and predestination.
Sure. So to be real clear, I mean, Adam or God could have created this garden, if it existed at all, without this tree, right? He could have put the tree outside the garden. And that would have been a better situation according to this story, right? Because then there would be no evil in the world, right? Supposedly. Okay, so...
But we had to have free will. That's their...
Yeah, that's another
but
BS thing.
One has to ask if free will... Doesn't free will always have to end with the option of having something bad? I mean, if you have a choice...
Right.
If you have a choice, then, well, bad or sin or evil is always going to be there.
I think the free will question is kind of interesting. Did Adam have a free will? Did they have a free will? Well, maybe they did, but they didn't have the knowledge to make intelligent decisions.
Yeah.
Right. So free will is like useless without knowledge, right?
It's like, and I don't mean to just be crude, but this is a good example. If you have an infant who's constantly wetting their pants, and they're not of an age where they can have a proper understanding of and I'm not saying that that's evil. I mean, this is just a behavioral thing, but they don't understand that what they're doing is wrong as far as you're concerned. How can you possibly justify punishing them for that? If Adam and Eve didn't have knowledge of good and evil until after they ate the tree, then you can't possibly hold them responsible for eating the tree that they didn't realize was actually bad.
Right. Well, there's this other problem that Adam and Eve didn't exist, so I don't know anything.
Well,
they're a metaphor of some sort at
a
best.
Strong possibility that Jesus never existed either,
that's
we know nothing about Moses or a lot of the other Old Testament people.
Right.
There's a good chance that most of this is just
okay. So we have this original sin problem, this horrible problem that has to be solved somehow. So how do we solve it? We bring Jesus into the picture, right? And actually, it's my understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's my understanding that the whole concept of original sin doesn't exist in the Old Testament at all.
Right.
And that it was actually glommed on to this Jesus story as a justification for this sacrifice thing, right?
That's
so
when the devil was reworked as the serpent.
Oh, okay, right, okay. So we have this sacrifice meme, this unjust punishment meme, right? That is very powerful. I mean, everybody can relate to being punished unjustly, right? That it's a very powerful notion, and so you have to, and this thing is kept taking hold. And how do you justify it? Well, you have to backfill and say, well, this relates back to this fall of mankind that didn't really exist until much later when you're trying to use it as a rationalization.
It kind of depends. I mean, on the one hand, there are verses in the Old Testament that talk about the sins of the father being passed on. So maybe original sin might not necessarily have been. You would really need to speak to a rabbi to talk to what conventional Judaism says about this kind of thing, since that's primarily their book. But there was some concept of sin and how it entered the world through the story, even if it doesn't imply that everybody is automatically sinful at birth. And the sacrifice thing, I mean, that was established in the Old Testament of, hey, we're going to sacrifice a goat or this or that, or Abraham's called to sacrifice his own son, but I'll save that. Go ahead.
That's another little juicy bit.
Yeah, I'm kind of irritated this week about things like that.
Okay. So, But this whole Jesus coming to earth and doing all this was orchestrated by God, right? And this was
I think it was orchestrated by Paul.
Well, but there's that, right?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you can certainly believe that Paul made up this whole story, right? And there's a lot of evidence for that. But in the story, it's orchestrated by God, right? I mean, God has to have this blood sacrifice for this earlier problem that He created. And why do you have to have a blood sacrifice? Who's making up the rules? Well, God is. And it's all just,
it's really absurd.
It just doesn't make any sense.
There was a
guy, you have all this drama going on in explanation of nothing.
I'm going to sacrifice myself to satisfy rules that I wrote. Boy, that's a good idea.
Yep. So that's what a devious designer.
I think you're getting ready to get to it. So
yeah. So did Jesus even suffer? Well, he became a god, or he was a god to begin with. So is there really any sacrifice at all? But the real problem here is you can't transfer a moral debt. Right?
But God can. That's the explanation. I don't mean to rain on your parade, but being a former Christian,
you are raining on my parade.
Being a former Christian, God can do this.
Oh yeah, He can.
That's how He got with it. The interesting thing is that there's an idea within Christianity, which somebody presented to me a couple weeks ago, because we spoke a lot about Jesus, and that's that when you were talking about did Jesus actually suffer? Because my thinking is, of course, if you willingly sacrifice yourself, knowing without any doubt that you're going to be raised up again in 3 days and live forever in heaven, and oh, by the way, I am God. What kind of sacrifice is that really? And then how do you explain Jesus' dying words of why hast thou forsaken me? And the guy said that basically God borrowed Jesus and walked around in a Jesus suit for 33 years, and then just before the torture started, because God can't experience pain or suffering.
Oh, he bugged out of there.
He left. So could you imagine that there's this guy who wakes up at the age of 33 and goes, hey, what the hell are you guys doing
on here? I don't know.
People are flaying his skin.
Holy crap, yeah.
I mean, it's just silly.
That's a good one. I hadn't heard that. That's pretty good.
Where do I get my Jesus suit?
Okay, well, you know, right. So for us mortals, the whole idea of transferring a moral debt is a bogus concept, right? I can't go to jail. It doesn't make sense. It's morally wrong to send someone to jail for somebody else's crime,
right,
for example. Right, so God, Jesus can't take on any moral debt from me, right?
Although, and I'm not raining on your parade, I'm just talking about something alternate here.
Okay.
There is a concept within the human mind of transferring that kind of debt in like these long-running religious wars. Or let's take religion out of it. The Hatfields and McCoys.
Okay.
Your grandfather killed my grandfather, and therefore I hate you, and I'm going to kill you. So that type of thing exists, but it's not an actual transfer of moral duty or moral wrong. It's just this schism occurred a long time ago, and it's the reason that I still hate all of your relatives. So it's not a real transfer.
It could be a hatred of people so much that you want to harm them disproportionately and take out their children, right?
Right.
You want to harm them even more than just the person, right? So,
although I think a lot of that comes from people reading things like the sins of the father be transferred on the fourth generation, and God's orders to go kill your enemies and save the virgins and kill everything else.
Well, you have a lot of good questionable stuff in the Bible.
God-fearing people who were involved in those family feuds.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, so I think that this whole substitutive sacrifice is just a mind game that sabotages the notion of justice. Taken together, original sin and Jesus and substitutive sacrifice, we only end up with a mind game. It's a tangle of karmic debts, right? You've got Adam and Eve supposedly causing some problems that affect you, and Jesus supposedly fixing those problems, and in actuality, none of that is even there. I mean, it reminds me of the Enron scandal, right, where we have this big company creating all these little companies to shove off debt so that they can look good, right? It's a shell game is all it is, in my opinion. So I've got some more stuff, but why don't we put up the number? We're a live call-in show. It's January 29th, and we're a live call-in show. You're welcome to call and ask us questions either on the topic of sin or on atheism in general. We'll be glad to answer those, and we'll take some callers. You can queue up, and we'll take some callers in a little bit. Did you want to add anything?
No. I think you're getting ready to get to the good stuff.
The good stuff?
The really good stuff. Not when I say good stuff, sometimes I'm talking about things that I can make fun of because it's absurd.
I'm going to veer off the Bible right now. So if you've got some biblical stuff that you want to hit, that I haven't hit, because there's a lot of interesting.
There's a lot of little bitty things, discussions of sin and everything else. I think, and this is kind of tangential, but I've begun to look at the Bible as, obviously we can't reconcile the concept of an omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent God with the problem of evil. And a lot of these proclamations don't make sense, and we pointed out the absurdity of sacrificing oneself to appease rules that you made up. And the whole framing that was Eve was framed involved in that. But I've been doing a lot of different Bible studies and talking with people about things. And to me, and I may have mentioned this before, it's becoming more and more evident that the Bible, rather than being a history of the Jews with some new religion glommed on in a second part, is actually a testament to the ineptitude and absurdity and utter failure of this one deity. I mean, you have in the first chapter of Genesis, the first word for God is Elohim, which is plural, which brings up a whole bunch of other issues. And then you have Yahweh Elohim, which is, hey, this is Yahweh or Jehovah of the Elohim and one of the gods. And he's the one who befriends the Jews. Well, let's say, if you take a look at it, it creates the garden. That fails. Okay, now we've got to kick them all out. We need to institute some other solutions. And then you've got
the flood.
everybody is so sinful that I'm now going to have to kill everybody except for 8 people and a bunch of animals. Yeah. So obviously this screw-up is compounded, but I'm going to set it right. So by setting it right, God kills everybody but Noah and his family, and the whole world starts over. And then
creates a rainbow to make it all better.
Changes the light, refraction of light. Then, just a few hundred years later, when there couldn't possibly have been enough people to do so, they've already forgotten about God saving them out of the entire humanity and start constructing a Tower of Babel. Hey, no, we can't have them building a tower up to heaven, despite the fact that, well, now we know that there's no way any tower could have possibly reached anything called heaven. Maybe God just didn't want them to get up so high that the oxygen was too low for them to breathe and they would fall off to their death, but
I doubt it.
Instead, he decides to destroy it and separate them all and confuse their languages, despite the fact that we actually have a better understanding of how languages diverged from different forms.
I've forgotten about that one.
So
that's a good one.
You know, it continues on, and there's a failure, and God does something to correct it, and a failure, and God... Oh, and before we even got to the flood, there's the whole, we're going to rescue the Egyptians, you know, part the sea and march them across on dry land, get them up to a mountain, and then they say, screw that God, let's make a calf.
Oh, I know, it's hilarious. Yeah, 1 minute they're saying, Yahweh,
How can you be so disrespectful?
We'll worship you forever, and 30 seconds later, they've melted down a...
You got failure after failure, all culminating in, okay, now I'm going to come up and fix this once and for all and send Jesus, which he's going to be the ultimate sacrifice and will fix everything. And you know what? Doesn't really seem to have fixed a whole lot. The world's still pretty much a mix of good people and bad people.
I think even Pat Robertson has admitted that more people have been killed in the name of Jesus than any other religion.
But the other thing is that he must have known that all of this was going to repeatedly fail, and even sacrificing Jesus he knew was going to fail, because there's this concept of a second coming and a rapture and the reformation of heaven and earth. I mean, it's just one failure and fix after another. If this was a car, we'd have sent it back. You know, you sold me a lemon. But we were talking originally about sin, and you've got
some more stuff.
A better way to look at things.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you know, we have this concept of personal responsibility, and I think that's really, I think sin is a bastardization of that. I think personal responsibility is what we should be dealing with. And here's how it works. I mean, each person takes responsibility for their own actions, right? If they do harm to someone, they owe a debt. They need to make reparations to the person they've harmed. And the person who did this was meant to learn a lesson and not repeat his mistake. Okay, and there's a whole notion of learning going on here, and over time less harm is done and the world improves, right? And things get better. And forgiveness is appropriate for people who understand the gravity of what they've done and who make a sincere effort at redress, at fixing the problems they caused. And we're all human. We all make mistakes, and we nearly all have the capacity to learn from those mistakes and to improve. And this is the whole idea of personal responsibility: is taking responsibility for your actions and dealing with the consequences of. And our whole legal system is based on this idea of personal responsibility, right? You're punished if you do something wrong to society. We agree as a society what our laws are.
And every legal system has been based on this, right? Back to the Ten Commandments and the Hammurabi Code.
Absolutely.
I mean, you've done something wrong, you're going to have to pay for it.
Right.
It's just they've managed to glom on this idea of, you know, a man has an inherently sinful nature, and they kind of personify sin in the form of the devil, and they view and look at sin and evil as things instead of concepts about actions that people actually do.
Right. As an atheist, I don't even buy into this whole concept of sin. It's a supernatural thing. It's the notion of owing some sort of debt to God.
Right.
Until you prove that God exists or give me some convincing evidence that God exists, then this whole thing is just made up.
Yeah, and let's focus on settling our debts to our fellow man.
Right. Another important concept in law is the rule of law, that everybody's responsible for their own actions, and there's nobody above the law, right? And that's part of it.
If this were the Daily Show, I'd have a comment right there, but go ahead.
Okay. So let's contrast this with how sin works. Well, with sin, which I claim is an inferior substitute for responsibility, the person harmed is supposed to forgive and forget, and they effectively get robbed in the process. The person who doing the harm has to pay some sort of reparations to God or Jesus or the church in form of money, like a tithe or a what's the word, an indulgence, right?
Yeah,
they have to say the rosary or do some sort of other brainwashing, or they have to pray or whatever. But the atonement goes to God and not to the person being harmed.
So basically, if I stole your car, you would have to forgive me, and I would have to give a car to the
Well, that
church.
seems to be what the sin idea is, right?
It seems like that to me,
Right.
which is as absurd as anything else. But
Right. And the perpetrators are led to believe by this concept of sin that they've actually been washed of the responsibility.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm absolved.
You go to a confessional.
Thank you, Father.
Right. So there's no redress to the person harmed. And so what ends up happening with this mechanism is religion ends up benefiting at the expense of the victims. So
I wonder where else religion benefits at the expense of victims.
Yeah. So and nothing's improved. It's in the religion's best interest to actually perpetuate this and to have a world where there's suffering and harm, because they're effectively gaining from it. And so that's why sin is a horrible concept, and is a crappy substitute for personal responsibility.
As a kind of a side note to that, talking about personal responsibility and the church's gains and everything, one of the many articles, discussions, things I've been having lately, focus on the book of James, which happens to be my favorite book in the New Testament, because James is somebody who, despite the fact that belief and faith are important to him, James's whole book or letter to the 12 tribes is about works. He's basically saying, yeah, I know you're going through hard times, but bite your tongue, have some patience, and make sure that you're demonstrating your high moral character by doing good works. And he goes into great detail about works being far more important than faith. He says if faith without works is absolutely useless, and can faith alone save me? Well, that's in direct contradiction to what John and Paul, to an extent, because Paul focused on works a little as well, say about the road to salvation. So you have these two contradictory concepts about salvation. But the question is, James wasn't in the first of the canons for the New Testament, or at least the first semi-heretical canon. And there was a lot of debate. People in the early church, the church fathers, had a lot of discussion about the book of James because, hey, he's talking about doing good works, and works being the primary root.
Well,
so
I think there's some fundamental ambivalence here about whether it's good works or whether it's your belief that gets you to heaven. Right? I think there's a lot of confusion about that, right?
Catholics and Protestants look at it completely two different ways. But they didn't want James in there because it sent the wrong message. There's an example in the first chapter of James that talks about those people who do good works will receive the reward promised to those who love God, which makes it sound like you're actually going to earn your salvation through works regardless of what your faith is. So there's a lot of talk about that. And my question is, why would the church not want that in there? And the answer is surprisingly simple. If it's possible, if all of this is true and there was a God and there was some path to salvation, if it's possible to earn your salvation through works, as James implies, then there's no need for a church. There's no need for praying. There's no need for plenary indulgences. There's no need for tithes, priests, preachers, and that completely eliminates the entire church structure. And that's why they were opposed to James. And that's why you get so much focus on John 3:16, which John being the gospel that talks about faith, whereas the three synoptic gospels do focus more on works. I mean, actually, there's a guy who comes up and asks Jesus, what do I have to do to be saved? And he says, keep the commandments. He didn't say, believe that I died for you, or that I'm getting ready to die for you, or anything else. Those are the words that are attributed.
I guess if that conversation actually happened, there'd be no need for belief.
Yeah. But this concept of the church benefiting and keeping myths around, I mean, I was a Christian for 20-some-odd years. I know there are good things in the Bible. Like I said, James is my favorite book, and I think James makes some good points. And because he says true religion, James says, is going out and visiting the fatherless and visiting the widows and helping those people in need. And, well, if that's true religion, then I'm all for true religion, but only in that very limited sense. But, yeah, the church has a real need, and people in the church want to focus on the good things. They want to focus on that little comment from James about doing good works in order to demonstrate your faith. And they want to throw out all the barbaric stuff in the Old Testament. They want to throw out, concepts of hell. There's been a softening in the liberal Christian community of doctrine, and back to even Thomas Jefferson, who got rid of all the supernatural stuff. Well, the church fights
they want to
against
find ways to market it. It's free enterprise here in the United States.
If you can't sell it, how does your preacher get paid?
Right. And there's no accountability for lies, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I can tell. They can lie all they want, and so whoever has the best lie gets the highest pay. Anyway, let's take a few calls. Sure. I've got a little bit more, but we can take a few calls. And
I have a feeling we'll like this.
Okay.
We got Walter. Are you there?
Yeah. How y'all doing?
Pretty good. How you doing?
Doing good. I just wanted to say, you seem pretty targeted against Christianity. What if, in the fact that, what if you're wrong? Are you prepared to deal with the consequences of that decision? I mean, you used to be a Christian, but then you end up living, your life just pretty much for yourself, and then you find out afterwards that, you made the wrong decision.
What if you find out, are you a Christian?
Yes, sir.
What if you find out that you made the wrong decision, and it's not Jesus who's God, but it's Muhammad or Krishna or somebody else? You're in exactly the same position we're in. I just believe in one fewer God than you do.
Yeah, but you don't believe in any gods at all. I mean...
Right, and I can go... If I find out that I'm wrong, I can be in the position of Colonel Ingersoll, where I'll go up and say, hey, I did not have the evidence enough to convince me. I was true to my own beliefs. I looked at all of these possible religions. I looked at the situation as a whole, and this is what my mind led me to. You cannot believe something that your mind won't accept. And if I'm to be held responsible for analyzing things critically and skeptically and rationally, and then damned for it, screw them.
Yeah, but even so, even if, something as intricate as the human body, wouldn't you think that there's some kind of, creation involved in that, and some kind of engineering involved?
Why?
Why? What do you mean, why? Why? Because it's such a detailed, system. Just when you think of like chemistry and science.
The fact that something's complex and you may perceive design does not mean that you can actually assert what the designer is. Evolution is a process of random mutations, but the design element of that is natural selection. Things become ordered according, to their and matched to their environment by a process of natural selection. You can't automatically infer that there is an intelligent designer without actually proving it. Yeah. And despite being a prank caller, that was actually a good call.
It was actually a good call.
You got more to add on that? I mean, not the screaming part, but the design element.
Sounded like a monkey, but maybe that was intentional. I don't know. If people ask, are you willing to accept responsibility? Right. The answer is yes. I'm willing to accept the consequences of my actions.
As if you could actually, if there was a God, and you got up before him, as if you could actually kind of hem and haw and come up with some excuse. I mean, if he exists, he already knows what's going on.
Right.
Presumably.
Right. But I actually see a lot of things that are done in the name of Christianity and other religions where people are being harmed, actively being harmed. I was going to talk a little bit later about the priest scandal, the pedophile priests, and what about the responsibility of those people? What about the responsibility of people that buy into the sin concept and cause harm because of their buying into it? Who are you are you taking responsibility for your beliefs there? And I think the answer is no. I think a lot of people, they just want to go to heaven and to hell with everybody else.
Literally.
So yeah, literally. So, this is a two-way street. You know, I'm absolutely willing to accept the consequences of my actions. I think that makes the world a better place, and I'm very much invested in it. And I wish other people were as well.
Yeah, I think I don't know of anybody within the ACA or the host or co-host. And matter of fact, I don't know that many people in the secular community or anywhere that aren't actually willing to say, yeah, I'll take responsibility for my action. There's an impetus in human culture to try and avoid having to take responsibility, but you know, if you're willing to actually, I mean, it's part of being socially responsible to everybody. And why would anybody presume that could or would possibly end after I die? If I die and I end up standing before some God in judgment, and there's absolutely no reason why it should be your God, you know, as opposed to somebody else's, I can stand there and honestly say that, you know, I looked at it all. I looked at as much of it as I could. I understood it as best I could. I made the best decision I could with the evidence I was presented. And we're not dogmatically stuck here saying there is no God. I don't have a belief in a God. If there's evidence for a God, then you actually need to produce it. Which, I guess, the thing is, it's got to be, the evidence has to be proportional to the claim. Some absurd claim like supernatural stuff needs large evidence for it, not just anecdotal comments and hearsay. And
Right. There's a very famous quote by Carl Sagan: "Extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence to back them up." And if you're claiming I went down this, you know, if I'm claiming I had lunch today at Schlotsky's, then that's not an unusual claim, and I don't need to have a lot of evidence to back that up. But if you're making claims about God and demons and ghosts and goblins, then you know, show me some evidence. Let's take another caller. What do you think?
Sure thing. We got Jerald. You there?
Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I have I'm just going to talk about what that guy just talked about. I have like a follow-up.
Okay. Okay.
I agree with him, like, about how he's saying, are you willing to take responsibility?
You're breaking up.
Hello?
You're still here.
Okay. Well, I'm saying I agree with how he's saying, are you willing to take responsibility for the decision he made to
And we just said we are.
Okay, so, well, how do you know that? Because you said, am I willing to take responsibility, like, if I'm not a Muslim or I'm not a Buddha, I don't believe in Buddha, but here in the Bible, in front of me, it says, thou shalt not have other gods before me, so I can't believe in any of those other religions.
So what makes the Bible the authority? And not the Quran or the Vedas or whatever, some other scripture, or no scripture. What actually about it is it about the Bible that makes you think it's a reliable authority for making a decision on how to live your life and what the truth of existence is?
Because historical authors wrote that book. Like, God wrote part of it.
God wrote part of it.
Historical authors wrote the Iliad.
Yeah,
you know?
Historical authors write everything.
Written by the actual scripture.
So you're saying God actually wrote the Bible?
He didn't write the whole thing. A lot of them are, like, written by Paul.
Which parts did God write?
I believe he wrote Genesis.
Okay. Most scholars attribute that to an unknown author, although it used to be attributed to Moses. I'd recommend that you look into a book called Who Wrote the Bible, or visit the infidels.org website for more information. Go to their library section, do a search for Bible canon or New Testament canon or Old Testament canon, and you can get information on the process that was involved in writing the Bible that exists now. Because, you know,
it's a very interesting process that went on.
I'm always fascinated about things about Christianity and the Bible. I mean, that's kind of where I live in my research stuff. But yeah, I love that stuff. It's interesting how this comes around, because there's a claim of that the Torah, which is the first 5 books, the Pentateuch of the Old Testament, existed in Solomon's temple. And there was one copy there that was there just so people could copy from it. And the rest of it was oral tradition, all the way up to around 200 BCE. And that's when you first start seeing some writings by the Essenes and others about this. But it's not till like 165, almost 200 CE, that the written word actually becomes the representative authority. I mean, there was written word that they relied on, but it was oral tradition that was the law. Because what you hear from your mom or your dad, what you hear from the church elder, you can convey much more speaking than you can with writing. Writing is an extremely limited medium. So that entire experience in the oral tradition was considered far more reliable than any written word, and it wasn't until almost the 2nd century, late 2nd century actually, that changed.
Yeah, and I think it's good for people to be aware of the fact that there was a very political process that was behind the creation of the Bible, and various people had all various agendas, and they have Jesus saying one thing or another thing because in the New Testament, because, well, that was the emphasis they wanted to put place, right? And it's like having a posable action figure, you know, saying whatever they want Jesus to say to make their point, right?
Yeah, and we don't know who a lot of the biblical authors were, although there are some that we kind of guesstimate about. For years, the majority of the New Testament was considered to be written by Paul, the Pauline epistles and everything. There is some question as to whether or not all of those were written by Paul and how much they've been modified, because 1 Thessalonians, which is one of the first, if not the first thing that Paul wrote, it's one of the oldest for sure, includes a statement that pretty much says verbatim, the Jews are the enemy of the world. They killed Jesus, they killed their own prophets, they are the enemies of all humanity. Now that completely contradicts things which are in other letters from Paul elsewhere. And the thing to remember is that around the time these books were canonized and being chosen, there were known forgeries. I mean, you can look right in the Bible and see Paul saying, I've signed this with my own hand so you know it's not a forgery, which tells us that forgeries were common and going on at that time.
Right.
And, you know, the entire last bit of Mark from chapter 16, verse 9 through 20 is a complete forgery, and that contains the Great Commission and handling snakes and drinking poison and casting out demons.
Right. And I think it needs to be emphasized that it was written by humans.
Yeah.
Along the way, and we have no evidence that it was written by God, and if you can provide such evidence, we'd love to consider it.
Yeah, there's parts of the Bible that will say that. The parts of the Bible, like
there's certainly that claim floating around.
You know,
yeah,
claiming that all Scripture is God-breathed, and they apply that to the whole Bible. But what they don't recognize is that at the time that was written, the only thing that existed was the Old Testament, and so it could only apply to the Old Testament and what that guy wrote. Because these guys were writing letters to each other, and
Paul was writing about the Scriptures. He certainly wasn't writing about the New Testament.
Yeah, they weren't necessarily writing something that was meant to be Scripture. You want to go on to more calls?
Sure.
All right, we got Chloe.
Hi guys.
How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. I'm listening to y'all, and a lot of things have to be said, and it's good that y'all are still doing this because these are definite times where our country is continuing to use this propaganda of God and to create war after war. It's really amazing when I watch your show and I hear people call in, and I cannot believe the ignorance that continues to exist.
Education is very important, absolutely. We agree.
Right,
yeah.
We have to be patient, we have to be tolerant, we have to teach on these things, and it's a good time to remember that, you know, in years past where there were these so-called good Christian people that were embezzling, that were committing sins. I heard the sin topic come up earlier, and it just goes a list and list of things that all these people hide behind Christianity, and it really is an endangerment to our continued evolution.
Yeah.
You know, it almost seems like we're at a halt.
Yeah.
You know, supernatural thinking and stuff like that does retard progress,
right,
and inhibits knowledge.
Yeah, when I was growing up, I used to look at the history and think, oh, what a bunch of morons these people were. They believe in this absolute nonsense. They go off and kill each other and all this stuff, and lo and behold, it's still going on.
Yeah, talking
we haven't learned anything.
Talking snakes and talking donkeys and you know, dragons and men walking on water and
holy wars. The holy wars are the most horrible thing ever created, right? because you have people trying to kill each other for stupid reasons, and they can't be convinced otherwise, right?
And there are differences between some of the religions, but that's another thing too, that should be acknowledged as a different cultural type rather than an attack because they're not Jesus believers. And I find such wrongness in that. I myself, having studied all the religions and even some that people aren't even aware of. I mean, it's just a cultural revolution when you think about it.
Right, and they can't all be right.
No, and they can't all be right,
but they can all be wrong.
Right. Yeah. I have a cardiologist that's a rabbi, and I love him, and it's just interesting, to see, what he thinks, and he's not a bad guy, and I'm tolerant of all that. Now, why can't these religionists be tolerant and be honest with themselves? But I think that goes back down to, that propaganda that's been fed into so many of us.
Yeah, I think so. I never like painting anybody of a specific belief with a broad brush if I can avoid it, because not all Christians are bad. Most of them, I would say, are good. I mean, they have a general belief and do good things and blah, blah, blah. We're talking about a small portion of the population, and not just with Christianity, and not just in this country, where you have these fundamentalists who are trying to enforce their religious opinion on as many people as they can, no matter how they can get away with it.
Right, because, we're seeing that in history, with other religions, and the nonsense of it, really, and all the misery that it continues to cause. I just get overwhelmed, when you hear people say, "Oh, God wrote the Bible." Do people realize how many times that's not true?
Sure.
Well, I actually, in fairness,
it's been altered. Even going back into old Hebrew studies, a lot of that too has just been rewritten,
spun and fabricated and all sorts of things, right?
Right, and it goes on, and I want to thank you all for having your show, because
thank you.
Maybe it'll reach some people and make them start thinking instead of them being brain dead. So I leave you with that.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, tell me the name of that book again that you recommend. Who Wrote the Bible? Is that the name of it?
Who Wrote the Bible is one of them. That's one I'm currently actually working through. I think if somebody wants to just start digging in the topic a little bit, theinfidels.org, so that's a great place to start. We actually have a copy of Who Wrote the Bible in the ACA library.
Infidels has a huge number of articles on
There's
some of the older ones.
Richard Friedman. Richard Friedman.
Richard Friedman? Who Wrote the Bible? Oh, it's already up there. Wow.
There are copies at half-price books, too, if you want to get it on.
Our guys behind the scenes here are also experts on these things. So we have a lot of very sharp guys in our group. So good deal. So we're going to go to dinner later on, huh?
Yeah. For any atheists or atheist-friendly people who'd like to join us, the cast and crew have been going to dinner after the show. Today we're going to Mongolian Barbecue again, down on San Jacinto near 2nd Street downtown. And next week that'll be changing to Threadgills on Barton Springs east of Lamar. But we will be at Mongolian tonight, somewhere between 6:30, 6:45.
Right. And maps and such are on the website if you want to look for it.
You can visit the atheist-community.org website for more information on this and any of the ACA's events.
Right. Okay. Well, we got a lot of calls, Keith.
Yeah,
let's keep going with the calls.
Keep on going. We've got Eric.
Yes, how's it going, fellas?
Pretty good. How you doing?
Pretty good, thanks. Earlier, someone made a comment about, are you prepared to face the consequences if you're wrong? And my response is also the same, basically, is that what kind of a God would build sort of this big pit of fire to put his mistakes and those he loves in,
Yeah, and what kind of God would create an entire world which, according to Christianity, is kind of like don't you call it a welcome mat, a doormat, to kind of wipe your feet and trial by fire to figure out whether you need to go to heaven or hell?
Yeah, and his way of alerting us to this, evil place that awaits us if we're wrong, is that he whispers it in some guy's ear in the desert, 2,000 years ago, and then they wait 40 years before they write it down, and then They have to,
he was probably catatonic at the time, or sunbaked.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for the alert, pal. You know, I appreciate it. It's not important or anything. Okay, so the other comment that's you hear frequently too is the intelligent design issue, and basically all that is no different than it's always been. Science can explain up to this certain point here, and we insert God for what we can't explain. I mean, what happened to that dude with the chariot pulling the sun across the sky, or that other dude with the lightning bolts? Where did those guys go? You know?
That's right. Not too long ago, they used to think that lightning bolts were God's wrath. In fact, I was reading about Franklin, and the priests at the time, or the clergy at the time, were actually angry with him because he was interfering with God's wrath. Right? If God meant to kill somebody with a lightning bolt, you shouldn't be interfering with that.
See, nowadays we know that lightning isn't God's wrath. God's wrath comes as a form of hurricanes and aneurysms.
Yeah. And I guess the last issue, and I'll hang up since you got a lot of callers. I want to get a coffee mug, by the way, too. But is that on the issue of evolution, is really the bottom line here is people, when they bring up evolution, they say there's no way this is an accident. To me, they're overshooting the issue of evolution, which is the descent with modification.
Right.
But it's very, very clear. It's a complete fact that all the animals that have ever lived on this planet were not created at one time. That should pretty much settle the issue in evolution, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Thanks a lot for calling, Eric.
All right, later, guys.
The strata in the fossil are showing the different changes over periods over time.
Yeah.
It's not like we dig down into one layer and find something that should be in another. I mean,
that's right.
That just doesn't happen. And in rare cases where you have crossing striations, there's always a good explanation for it. The fossil record over the last 150 years is proven evolution to be completely reliable.
Exactly.
Even if we didn't have all of the medical advances and all of modern biology, which is based on this.
Well, you'd think also the study of the genome would put the final nail in that coffin, but where we actually can decode the genes, which actually are the thing being evolved, right? It's not the bodies being evolved; it's the genes being evolved, and if you can list what all they are for all the different species, you can figure out what are the edits, what are the transformations that had to have occurred in order to create all these different varieties, and that should
of course that's a big
answer
problem.
That question.
That's a big problem with the people who are against evolution is, we've got this species here and this species here, and we theorize that, or hypothesize that this one evolved into this one, and over a long period of time they say, well, prove it, you got to find a transitional fossil. So we do right here, but that just means there's a new transition on this side and a new one on this side that they can point to and say, hey, you don't have those, and when we find those, now there's 4.
It's a Solomon game.
Yeah, they're putting an absurd requirement on evolution, and they're putting a rather lax requirement on evidence for their own beliefs. Absurdly lax.
They don't do they?
Yeah, actually they do. We got Billy. How you doing?
Pretty good, guys. How y'all doing?
Pretty good.
I just had a quick question for you. The author of that book y'all keep discussing was that guy a preacher?
Friedman?
Are you talking about Friedman from Who Wrote the Bible? I'm not sure what his background is.
Not sure, huh?
Okay.
Our
guys behind the scenes.
Where can I pick that book up at?
Actually, I couldn't actually tell you that. You can use the normal sources as you would to find any other book. There may even be copies of it online. We can't advertise any products, but I can tell you that it's a good book and a good source, and there may be references to it on the infidels.org site for free.
Okay, I'll go check it out. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks a lot.
I'm good.
Oops. Sorry, I hit that early. I wasn't trying to avoid you saying goodbye. Great. Let's go on to Steve. How you doing?
Hey, that one caller a little while back, his question to you about, you're going to live your life just for yourself.
Yeah.
It bugged me.
Yeah, I really should have hit that, and we didn't.
And the reason was, first, you just gotten done talking about your admiration of the works, but it bugs me just because I think it's a quick conclusion a lot of people jump to, that that must be the logical. For some reason, like that must be what people who don't believe in God do. They just live for themselves, and they have no. It's just so untrue. And the converse is also untrue. That people that believe in God I don't think any more live not for themselves than anybody else. I mean, I think everybody kind of cares about other people and what's going on, and has ways of contributing, and I think everybody looks after number one to a certain degree, and how that trade-off is made, and how you figure out how to do that is something everybody has to.
Well, we're a social animal, right? We have evolved from animals that work with other animals, or we work with each other. That's how we are such an advanced species, is we cooperate and we work together and we take care of each other and that sort of thing. And that's I think one of the nice aspects of human nature.
Yeah.
Really thanks. The conclusion people jump to. There's another one that happens on the same lines, which is there's nothing bigger than yourself. If you don't believe in a God, you think you are God, or you think there's nothing out there bigger than yourself. And it's like, well, there's just a bigger person right next to me that's bigger than myself. But I mean, it's just absurd. And there can be, in a sense, greater powers, not magical greater powers, but yes, the universe is out there, and it has things far beyond my own control over it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm really glad you called in to hit on this, because it was remiss of us to not jump on that. Well, a lot of times you'll get accused of, oh, you're just living for yourself, or you've put yourself up as God, or if you don't believe in anything, you therefore believe in nothing. A lot of things like that, and sometimes they're going to squeak through, but yeah, it's really important, because like I was talking about in the book of James and doing good works and everything else, I have no problem admitting that given a conflict, I tend to put my own needs ahead of somebody else's if that conflict exists. I just try to avoid conflicts like that whenever possible, because while I don't recognize the existence or believe in the existence of a soul in the supernatural sense, I very much believe in a poetic soul, a heightening of human spirit, I guess, in the poetic sense. And one of the ways you can do that is to, while in your pursuit of your own happiness, make sure you're not trampling on anybody else's, and lend a hand along the way. Help somebody out when they need it. Treat people with kindness and respect until it's no longer deserved, which happens on occasion. But yeah, this concept that if you believe in no God, you all of a sudden believe in nothing. Well, for the people who believe in a God, they just believe in one more thing, one more God concept than I'm willing to believe in. And if they dropped that, would they all of a sudden start killing or, behaving badly?
We've had callers where they claim that if I didn't believe in God, I'd, go kill people.
Yeah.
You can argue different attitudes about what constitutes good works and contributing to everybody else. There's a lot of good works that people do that are good things, but they also reap a lot of benefits from those good works themselves. Right. So is that bad? I don't necessarily think so. There's a lot of people that donate to their church and go get to work out in the exercise gym at the church that they paid the money to build. You know what I mean? So,
well, the example I
don't really care what they do, but
the example I like to give is that people. Christians potentially get a benefit of going to heaven for their good works.
Yeah.
Right? So does that negate the altruism? It's not so clear.
It reminds me a little. If you've got a spoiled brat out in public and they're behaving because you've offered them a cookie. Christians get upset when you use an analogy like that, but when you have a concept within your religion that man is inherently sinful and unable to resolve that sin problem on his own, you're very much in a position where all of a sudden now you've got a reward. And where you've got this spoiled brat, you have, for example, the cookie of eternal life and the watchful eye of the omniscient Father, and the pacifier of rewards in this lifetime.
And the spanking of hell.
Yeah, and the prod of eternal punishment. If you have all of those motivators there as the reason behind why you would want to do good works and behave yourself, it makes you wonder how the rest of us get along without it. But we do, and it's obvious that we do. And I've yet to find a Christian who I actually talked to who would say they don't understand how you can be moral without God, but they have no problem accepting the fact that we are.
Right. I think there's actually studies of how humans develop, and when you're really a small infant or a very young child, it's boiled down to simple punishments and rewards, but there's a process by which you develop beyond that, where you start to internalize these things. You don't need them anymore.
Right.
But so it seems like as grown-ups, you shouldn't need the heaven and hell concept anymore in order to
Right. It's part of our sort of emotional development, if you will. There's actually a pretty good article about that in Scientific American about 2-3 years ago. I don't remember the issue, but it talks about the moral development of children, and you're right that this sort of reward and punishment, daddy's going to spank you if you're bad, is something that kids kind of grow out of after a while. They end up doing it for the right reasons rather than for.
I'm gonna let you go, but I want to say one thing about your topic of sin, and that's about the obsession with other people's sin.
Yes.
And, that really gets me. You can talk about sin all day long and whether it exists and how you should deal with it, etc. But what really gets dangerous is when you decide it's your job to correct other people's sins. A lot of the damage comes from. So I'll let you go on that one.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for calling, Steve. It was a great point.
That's an excellent point. I'm so glad he brought it up.
It's a good call. And as a reminder, any atheist or atheist-friendly people who are wanting to meet the cast and crew can join us for the last time at Mongolian Barbecue downtown. And next week we'll be at Threadgill's down off of or on Barton Springs Road.
Right. So I think this whole sin thing is really about control anyway. So if you're into control, why not control other people, right?
I mean, if you, like the whole thing with sex, if you put sex in this kind of naughty connotation and just dump a whole bunch of baggage on it, it's really easy then to be saying, what you can and can't do sexually from a church standpoint.
Right.
You've set this whole thing up as
the missionary
sinful
position and all that good stuff. Yep. Yeah,
that's.
So I scratch my head wondering why Christians are so obsessed with other people's genitalia.
I think the reason is that the Bible's an example of some of the things that we consider absolutely perverted with regard to sex. You've got Lot's daughters who get him drunk and sleep with him in order to get pregnant, and these were the most righteous people.
Both of them,
back to back, and night after night, not at the same time. These were the most righteous people in all of Sodom, and God spared them. And the Christian apologists will say, well, they left that in there to show how bad Sodom actually was.
Right.
If these are the best, look, how bad could that have been?
Yeah.
But the fact is that they were considered righteous because God was going to save them.
But they always drag out the Sodom and Gomorrah story to persecute gays and try to take their rights away, that sort of thing.
Like they need it. I mean, you've already got a verse in there that says if a man lies with another man, it's an abomination and you're supposed to kill him. You don't need to trot out any other stories. You just need to say that's the verse. And the reason I point that out is that apart from like Fred Phelps or some other lunatic, nobody actually follows that direct order from God.
Yeah.
Which shows that they are going through and deciding what's good in the Bible and what they're going to keep and what's not good. Right. We don't need that anymore.
Cafeteria Christianity or whatever they call it, right? Where they just pick and choose, I'll have a little of that, a little of that. Or they bring out the New Testament when they want to bring in converts, and the Old Testament when they want to condemn somebody.
Yeah, if you're preaching fire and brimstone, you want the Old Testament and Revelation.
Yep.
And if you can, get your hands on like the Apocalypse of Peter and some of the apocryphal books that go into detail.
Yeah?
The Apocalypse of Peter goes into great detail on what goes on in hell. Anybody who blasphemes is hung up by their tongue. Those who are sexually indiscriminate, they're hung up by their genitals, and there's all these other things. And he's descriptive. And the Bible doesn't say much about what goes on in hell.
No,
but the Apocalypse of Peter, which is complete, it's not part of the canon, does.
Nor was it written by Peter, right? And all of these books were attributed to various folks.
It may have been. We're not sure on the authorship of that either. But it's not in the Bible.
Okay. Let's take a couple more calls.
Sure. Is it Lee?
Yes. Hi.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. This is the second time I've watched your show. The first time I tried to get a call in, but apparently so did the rest of the world. So I'm happy to get through today.
Well, let me interrupt you right there because we wanted to make a slight announcement that sometimes people try and get through really late in the show. If you've got something that you wanted to say and couldn't get through on the air, you can email us at tv@atheist-community.org. That goes to all the cast and crew, and we're pretty good about responding to it. You can also just tune in the next week and start calling earlier in the show. But anyway, what do you want to get to?
Well, I think there's a lot of amazing ironies going on throughout religion, obviously, but one of the biggest ones you guys have been talking about today occurred to me as a result of the caller who believes that if you don't believe in a God, then that means you're immoral and you'll kill people and what's to keep you from acting like a complete schmuck. Well, the irony to me is that in the name of religion, people do this every day. They kill people, they judge people, they have no morals whatsoever in the name of God or in the name of their particular religion. So it seems to me that if you're doing these wretched things in the name of your God or your religion, then it's cool. But if you're not, then, oh, you're a heathen. So, you can't have it both ways.
It reminds me, recently in Oklahoma City, there was that, I believe he was a Baptist minister, who got arrested for soliciting an undercover male police officer for sex. And he was an amazingly outspoken anti-homosexual preacher, who then claimed he was just down there trying to minister to the male prostitutes.
Yeah, I'm always very suspicious whenever I hear anybody take a very strong stand about something that is moralistic or sexual, because I think what you'll find is that they are the exact opposite, and it's a cover.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. Yeah, I was going to say that. I think that the whole purpose of God in public discourse is to shut down reason, right? If you bring out the God concept in politics, where you say, well, oh, God told me to go to war in Afghanistan and Iraq, then you're sort of shutting down people
who can object.
Who can object, right? Who can argue with God?
It's almost like God is the trump card.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
God is a trump card. He's a non-answer, and in my view, he doesn't exist. But
what I'd like.
I'm not afraid of your invisible friend.
Right. What I'd really like to know is why are people more often than not doing awful things in the name of God rather than good things in the name of God?
I think part of that isn't so much that there's more bad occurring than good. I think you're probably seeing more bad than good because nobody's going to bother to report that, this congregation of 1,000 just sits around and worships and helps the needy and the homeless on occasion. Because let's face it, the churches do have a stronghold on charitable organizations in the United States. Now, that's not to say there's not secular charities. There are plenty. There's some atheistic charities and other things. But they do good works. I just happen to find that it's not enough. Anything good that comes out of religion, you can get without the religion at all. And you don't get any of the religious baggage, and you don't get any of the scapegoats, the protection from taxes, the absolutely just disgusting way that the Catholic Church in particular has managed to shuffle pedophile priests around from church to church and hide them away and even send them out of the country to avoid bringing this to light. If you had a corporation that was as corrupt in this one little area, and I'm not saying that every priest is this way or anything, I mean, we tend to exaggerate it, but there's a real problem here, and it's prevalent. And if you had a corporation that was as this corrupt as something this just horrible,
any other organization doing that would be shut down under the racketeering laws.
And they'd be investigated and shut down, but the church prevails because it's the church. They've got this special treatment.
Well, and the whole hierarchy hasn't had to pay any responsibility yet. There's been no trials of the hierarchy, the people that have shuffled people around. Some of the priests themselves have been, but continue on. Sorry.
No. That's exactly what I was getting to.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else, Lee?
I think the bottom line to all of this is that religion is a very good way to control people through fear, especially when there is no proof one way or the other. So you get to say, well, you should believe this on the off chance that at the end there's a judgment.
Right. And there's a bit of a Pascal's wager in there.
Yeah.
Don't play it safe. Like that guy said to you, what if at the end you find out you're wrong, and there you are appearing, assuming you're appearing before God saying, well, you didn't believe in me, so you're going to hell now. Well, I don't think if there is a God, a loving God would ever do that. What would be the point?
Yeah, that was. I didn't want to be too off the cuff with my screw 'em comment, but that's the way I feel about it. If there actually is a God. Well, first of all, that sets up a problem, because if there's a God who actually gives a crap about any of this, we'd already know it. There wouldn't be questions or debates about what doctrine there is. Anybody could look and find out, and you just know.
Yeah, it makes sense, and I think that there was a time when people's religion used to be a very personal, private thing, and not only are we losing our privacy in every other area of our life in this country, but we're also losing it in the areas of religion. I don't think there's a day that goes by when I don't feel in some way assaulted, in a sense, by either one-on-one, by crossing paths with someone who feels the need to give me some big, religious lecture before they even know what my religion is or isn't, or what I believe. When it's happening one-on-one, and it's happening in an institutional way as well, and it used to be that we had some measure of privacy about that sort of thing, but now you feel it's almost like you're being spiritually mugged every time you walk out the door.
I agree. That's a good point. That the times have changed in that respect. We see a lot more of it in the public square and such, and there's this claim that people are being persecuted because we don't have the Ten Commandments, or we're trying to take it down off the Capitol grounds.
And 80% majority of Americans are being persecuted by us, 13, 14, 7%, whatever.
Yeah, however you want to measure it.
Whatever.
Yeah. So, and things might have been a little better, I think, when we kept those things private. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or at least give people the option. You want to share it, you can share it, and if you don't, we're not going to chase you all over town badgering you about it.
Right. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Lee. Thanks for calling. Yeah, I actually look forward to the day. I mean, I'm on an Atheist TV show. Lee and anybody else who would like to join us, Mongolian Barbecue, they've got the address up there. We'll be there between 6:30 and 6:45, and next week we'll be at Threadgills. This is the last week here, so come on down. But yeah, I look forward to the day. I have bumper stickers on my car, and I do a Atheist TV show. I agree with Colin again, where I look forward to the day when this is no longer an issue, where whether or not you believe in God is no more often discussed than whether or not you believe in Bigfoot or unicorns or elves and fairies and whatever. It becomes a non-issue. And the day that this program is no longer needed in order to enlighten people to say, hey, not everybody's a Christian, not everybody believes what you believe, not everybody is religious in any way. There are atheist people. We can be moral. We work with you. We're your neighbors. And we're not going to allow you to marginalize our rights just because you want your religious opinions out there. When that day comes, cool, I'm throwing a party. But it's not here yet, so we'll be back next week. We got a few minutes left in the show.
Okay.
Unfortunately. Let's go on to Ann.
I've been enjoying the dialogue, and I agree with your last caller.
Thank you.
Okay.
But I'm actually calling because of you're talking about how morals and how you teach your children. And I remember struggling with that when my children were young, because people get pressured by families to join a church, to join a synagogue, to give your child a religious education, because that's a moral thing to do.
Right.
But I was recently surfing a website, and I found something called Freedom from Religion Foundation in Madison, Wisconsin.
Yes, we're familiar with them.
Okay.
The music at the opening of the show was from Dan Barker, who
was one of the founders of it.
One of the founders of Freedom.
Oh, okay. Well, he wrote apparently 3 books for children.
Yes.
And I have not seen these books, but I thought I would, since you have maybe seen them, I thought maybe they would be good for people who are trying to raise their children in a...
We're so glad you brought that up.
Okay.
Do you happen to remember the titles of them?
I have them written down right here.
Wonderful.
Read them off.
Just Pretend. It was written in 1988, and it's a free thought book for children by Dan Barker.
Okay.
And then Maybe Yes, Maybe No is a guide for skeptics, written in 1990.
Okay.
And then Maybe Right, Maybe Wrong, 1992, a guide for young thinkers.
Wonderful.
So you've got the skeptical grounds covered, the moral grounds covered, and then what Just Pretend focuses on distinguishing between fact and reality and how it begins. Yeah.
Right. And it's so rare to find something.
Dan's an amazing guy. Dan was a minister, but primarily in the Christian music industry as well, producing, plays and stuff for people to put on at church, as well as some independent music. And
then he figured out he was an atheist.
Yeah, and wrote a beautiful letter to his family and friends and colleagues.
Lost a lot of friends in the process.
Lost a lot in the process. And he was one of a few who were a huge inspiration on me during my transition from, fundamentalist Christian thinking to atheism.
And know that there were people. A newspaper, too, called Free Thought Today.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do you know it? Have you seen it? Is it...
Mm-hmm.
Sure, we're big fans. And
I'm a subscriber to that. That's a good magazine.
Excellent. Okay.
So yeah, they're a good group. One of the things I really like about the group is they have a lot of women members and focus on family issues more than I think some of the other atheist groups do. While we're on the subject, I wanted to mention too, there's a group called Camp Quest. Right. That is a summer camp for kids. That's kind of indoctrination free. That focuses more on science and that sort of thing.
Right.
And that's something that's available to send your kids to during the summer.
Is that here in Austin or?
No, it's a national thing. I think they have.
Is that with the Council of Secular Humanism? That
I'm not sure.
It's tied to some secular organization. Basically, it's a way of sending your kids to camp without having to send them to a church camp or religious camp or Boy Scout organization.
I think they are looking to expand and have duplicates of it in other places, but I think it's in one or two places right now.
Sure, because it's really important for children to be able to identify and figure it out for themselves. You need to learn to question and choose for yourself what is right for you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you can only do that through questioning.
Absolutely.
Right.
It was one of the discussions I had recently this week. The guy made the absurd claim that doubt is exceptionally harmful to every aspect of life, and I just lit him up because you cannot in one breath say that faith is a virtue and that doubt is exceptionally harmful. Right. Doubt is responsible for every good discovery we've ever made.
Exactly.
Doubt is the reason why we don't think that lightning bolts come from Zeus. It's the reason why you have a cell phone and a computer.
And good old Ben Franklin who figured it out.
Yeah.
Right.
Doubt destroys dogma.
Yes. Oh, that's a good bumper sticker.
Yeah, I think so. I'm working on that.
Okay. Thanks a lot for your program.
Thank you for your
Thanks, Ann.
Bye-bye.
Doubt destroys dogma. That would be a good bumper sticker.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to think of good bumper stickers.
I do it all the time.
I love your bumper sticker that says blasphemy is a victimless crime.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites.
I like that one.
Because mostly you have to read it twice. If you're a believer, you have to end up reading that twice to go, what the heck does that mean? Blasphemy is a victim. Oh!
There's no victim. Yeah.
Let's take this. This is probably going to be the last call. We got Daniel. How you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
Hi.
Good.
Hey, I don't really have a concrete belief. I'm leaning towards agnosticism, which I guess leads me to my question is, I can maybe disregard Christian and maybe Judaism, Muslim beliefs in God, those types of gods. But what about other gods? Why would you discount any type of creator? I guess is mine.
Well, our attitude is that we want to see the evidence for something, for a claim like that. If you claim to have a God that I don't know. If you have an invisible pink, you claim that you have an invisible pink unicorn in your garage or something. I'd like to hear what evidence do you have for that? Can you show me? Can you prove it to me? Can I see it? Can I touch it? So it doesn't matter what the claim is, right? It can be a claim about cold fusion or perpetual motion or anything like that. We want to see a claim. If you're going to make an important claim like that, we want to see some evidence.
Yeah.
As regards to creation or life itself, you don't account for any specific reason or anything. You just say we are.
The origins of the universe and the origins of life tough issue. Evolution doesn't address it. It's left to abiogenesis, and yeah, we don't actually have a concrete answer. We've got some ideas, or different scientists do.
I think you know, science has made a lot of contributions towards asking those questions. They're important questions. They deserve to be asked.
The important thing is that just because you don't have an answer, that doesn't mean you can substitute an unproven God in as the answer.
Yeah.
And we're almost out of time.
And science answers a lot of those things, by the way. So I guess
I had a specific question regarding.
We're out of time, Daniel. If you can email tv@atheist-community.org, we'll get to it, or you can call back earlier in the show next week. We don't have enough time left to get to it, and but if you email me, I'll get it for next week. Thanks a lot to Don for coming. Had a lot of fun
here. Thank you to our callers and our cast and crew.
Yeah, absolutely, the crew, and for any people wanting to join us, we'll be at Mongolian Barbecue, 117 South San Jacinto near 2nd Street downtown, and this will be the last week for that, and we'll be at Threadgills on Barton Springs next week. So thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Yep.